Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and welcome to the next part in this unofficial series of how to play Warhammer 40k 7th edition.
We play and call it work.
In this episode, we're going to talk about all the various unit types that you can find within Warhammer 40k. We're not going to talk about vehicles or gargantuans or super heavies, except just to mention them right now. We're going to cover more things like infantry and jump units and jet bikes and beasts and monstrous creatures, and see exactly what differentiates them just from regular infantry. Let's take a look. Of course, our very first type is just plain old infantry, like these Orc Boys, Space Marine Tactical Marines, even this Librarian and these Grey Knight Terminators are all just considered to be infantry. Infantry units are the simplest. They just follow the regular rules. They move 6 inches in the movement phase, they charge their 2d6 inches in the assault phase, they're shooting, everything else, the way they interact with terrain is just the basic default rules. The next type of unit that we have are bikes, like these Orc bikes or these Space Marine bikes. Bikes are typically 1 toughness higher than the standard toughness of whatever it is that they represent. For example, these Orcs riding bikes are toughness 5 instead of toughness 4, as are these Space Marines. On top of that, bikes cannot go to ground and cannot be pinned. Now, going to ground is where you opt to take extra cover, but then you're not able to move in your next turn and you have limited shooting and are not able to charge. Being pinned forces you to go to ground. And so both bikes and jet bikes, as we'll talk about, do not suffer these penalties. As you may already have assumed, bikes are fast. Instead of moving 6 inches, they get to move up to 12 inches in the movement phase. However, they are not as good with working with terrain as regular infantry. While they are no longer slowed by difficult terrain, they get to move their full 12 inches, any model that passes through difficult terrain has to take what is called a dangerous terrain test. A dangerous terrain test is done by rolling a single d6 for each model. You have to do them individually. And if you roll a 1, that model takes a wound. Now, armor saves or invulnerable saves can be taken, but no cover saves. So it is dangerous usually for them to go through difficult terrain. In the shooting phase, each bike can fire a number of weapons equal to the number of pilots. For a regular bike, this will usually just be 1, but we do have some things like the attack bike, which has 2 pilots, so they're able to fire 2 weapons. A lot of bikes will be armed with their own weapon, and then the Space Marine or the rider itself will have a weapon of their own as well. They have to choose which one of these they will fire because they can still only fire 1 weapon. On top of that, bikes have what's called the Relentless special rule. Essentially, this means that they count as having not moved for firing weapons. So if one of these happened to have a missile launcher, for example, which normally forces you to snap fire when you move, they don't have to. They treat themselves as being stationary. Furthermore, bikes cannot run, but they can opt instead to do something similar called a turbo boost. A turbo boost, they have to not shoot, and then they can move up to 12 inches in the shooting phase instead. If they do a turbo boost, it counts as running in the sense that not only can they not shoot, but they will not be able to charge in the subsequent assault phase. Bikes also have the Hammer of Wrath special rule. Hammer of Wrath basically means whenever they charge in, for every bike that gets into base contact, they get an extra strength, whatever their profile is, in this case 4, attack at initiative 10. We're not going to completely cover Hammer of Wrath, but just essentially think of it as in they're smashing into the enemy and they get to do extra damage because of that impact. And lastly, because of their speed, they have the Jink special rule. The Jink special rule allows them to get a cover save even out in the open at the cost of some of their shooting capabilities. Essentially, when they are targeted by a shooting attack, before the attack is resolved, they can opt to Jink, which gives them a cover save out in the open. However, in their subsequent shooting phase, they can only snap fire because they've been moving erratically and won't have as much accuracy. Next up, we have jet bikes, such as these Necron Tomb Blades and these Harlequin bikes. Jet bikes follow all the same rules as regular bikes, with a couple exceptions. For one, they don't care about terrain quite as much. If they pass through any type of terrain, they can totally ignore it. In fact, they can even ignore intervening models. For example, these tomb blades could move theirs 12 inches over to the other side without worrying about the harlequins who are in between. Normally you can't do this. Normally you have to stay an inch away, and you can't pass through models of any kind, friendly or enemy. However, if a jet bike starts or ends its movement in difficult terrain, it has to take a dangerous terrain test, just like bikes moving through terrain. When a jet bike turbo boosts, it gets to move up to 24 inches rather than a normal 12 inches. An Eldar jet bike is an even further exception to this rule in that it gets a turbo boost up to 36 inches away. And lastly, Eldar jet bikes are even more special. Not only do they get to turbo boost 36 inches, but if they choose not to do that, then in the assault phase, they can make a special move called a jet bike move. And all they do is roll 2d6, in this case I rolled 10, and they're allowed to move 10 inches in the assault phase without charging. So this is different than a charge. It's not choosing a target and taking Overwatch. They just get to move that 10 inches. This makes them very maneuverable. They can jump up, shoot some guns, and then assault move away and get out of the range of enemy weapons. Next up, we have artillery units, such as this Space Marine Tech Marine with his Thunderfire cannon. Artillery is interesting in that the gun itself does not operate independently and always needs a gunner. Sometimes you can have more than one gun in the unit and more than one gunner, but if you want to be able to move, you have to have at least one gunner per artillery model. Artillery units move just like infantry. As long as there's at least one crewman per gun, they can move their regular 6 inches. However, this will definitely affect their ability to fire, because you still have to follow the regular restrictions. And normally artillery are heavy weapons, which don't like to be fired if they have moved. When you're shooting with artillery, any gunner, not independent character who joins it, but just the gunners, who's within 2 inches of an artillery can opt to fire the artillery instead of his own guns. That means the Tech Marine will not be able to use any of the weapons that he's equipped with. He'll fire this one instead. Usually that's better anyways, because that's why you bring the artillery. Furthermore, both the Tech Marine, or the gunner, and the gun itself have to be able to draw a line of sight to the target, unless it's a barrage weapon or something else that ignores that rule. When firing at artillery, as long as there's still at least one gun model available, you use the gun's toughness in order to determine if you can wound them. And the gun's toughness is always 7. The gun also counts as having 2 wounds and an armor save of 3+, but other than that has no other stats. When you fire, you still allocate to the nearest model. So if we had the Tech Marine up front, even though they're going to be going against toughness 7, they would use him as the first one for the armor saves. So sometimes you want to keep your artillery out front to tank all the shots, but some other times, like the Tech Marine who has a better armor save, maybe he wants to be out front, because as soon as you lose all of your crewmen, the gun is automatically removed. So 2 things can happen to kill the gun. First off, maybe it's the first one to get hit from shooting attacks and it just dies, in which case the gunman is free to do whatever he wants with his own weapons. The other way the artillery can die is if all of the crewmen are destroyed, in which case the gun is automatically removed as a casualty as well. When assaulting artillery, only the crewmen can fire Overwatch and they cannot use the gun to do so. And when you actually move in, still use the gun as one of the models that you move into base contact with, but after that you just use the toughness of the crewmen and their weapon skill. You never attack the artillery itself, you only attack the crewmen. If they lose combat and fall back, then if they need to have as many models as there are guns in order for the guns to fall back as well, otherwise the guns are destroyed. On top of that, if there is a sweeping advance, then we assume that they automatically fail their initiative test and just outright die. Our next unit type is jump units, such as the Space Marine Vanguard Marines or these Orc Storm Boys. As you can imagine, jump units have a couple of advantages when it comes to movement. First off, they're faster, or can be faster, and second off, with terrain, they're going to be able to get up and down it a lot quicker. Now, you have to choose if you're going to use the jump pack in the movement phase or the assault phase. Unless they have a special rule, you won't be able to use it in both phases. So whenever you're not using a jump pack, just treat them like infantry. They move 6 inches, they take difficult terrain tests, and everything else is fine. But when they use their jump packs in the movement phase, they can move up to 12 inches They can ignore intervening models and terrain, just like jet bikes and bikes. But if they start or end in difficult terrain, just like bikes or jet bikes, they will have to take a dangerous terrain test. If a unit of jump infantry use their jump packs in the assault phase, they get a couple extra benefits. First off, they still have to think about the normal rules, that if they're using them and they start or end in difficult terrain, they do have dangerous terrain tests. But it is worth the risk in a lot of cases. First off, they get to re-roll failed charge distances, or actually just their charge distance, even if they just did make it. And furthermore, they gain the Hammer of Wrath special rule. Remember, with the bikes, the Hammer of Wrath is essentially representative of them smashing at their enemy, and they get extra automatic hits based on their own strength. If they are forced to make a fallback move, they fall back 3d6 inches rather than 2d6. And on top of that, they have the Deep Strike special rule. We're not going to talk about Deep Strike in detail, but essentially it allows you to arrive from reserves onto anywhere on the table within reason, and there is a bit of danger with that as well. Now we have jetpack units, very common to the Tau Empire. Jetpacks work a little bit like jump packs, but are a little more limited, and also have an extra special rule that is really cool. Essentially, once again, they can choose to use their jetpacks when they move, but they still only move 6 inches. But if they use their jetpacks, then they can ignore intervening terrain and models, and then if they start or end in difficult terrain, once again, they have to take a dangerous terrain test. Jetpacks, like Eldar jet bikes, have access to a special move in the assault phase, in this case called a thrust move, that even if they ran or shot in the shooting phase, as long as they don't charge, they can roll 2d6 and move that far, in this case 10 inches, in the assault phase, using all the normal rules for movement with jetpacks. In other words, they can ignore intervening models and terrain, and if they start or end in difficult terrain, then they must take a dangerous terrain test. This is really useful for, once again, maneuvering, because you can move up, get in range of your guns, shoot, and then jetpack move away and get behind cover, or just get further away from your enemy so they can't charge you as easily. Or maybe you want to get close to them, so this will help you to close that distance. Jetpacks also have the Deep Strike special rule and Relentless. So like bikes, they count as being stationary when firing their weapons, and their weapons being fired doesn't stop them from charging in case there was normally restrictions there, and Deep Striking allows them to enter the playing field anywhere they want using the Deep Strike special rules. Next up we have beasts, such as these Tyranid Raveners or these Chaos Spawn. Beasts are exceptionally fast and get to move 12 inches, just like bikes. But unlike bikes, they get to just ignore terrain. They don't have to worry about it. It does not slow them down, even when they're charging. On top of that, they automatically pass any dangerous terrain tests they are called to make. However, if they ever need to fall back, they fall back 3d6 inches rather than the normal 2d6 inches, which makes them fall back even farther. But they do make up for that by having the Fleet special rule. The Fleet special rule allows for two things. If they decide to run, and they don't like what they rolled, in this case a 2, they can re-roll it. You have to take whatever the re-roll is though, so if it was worse, but in this case it was better. And if you charge, and don't like what you rolled, you can re-roll one or both of those dice. That gives you a lot of control, because maybe you rolled a 6 and a 1, but you needed a 9-inch charge, for example. Well, it's too bad if you had to re-roll the 6, but because you get to re-roll one or both, you could just choose to re-roll the other one, and have a much better chance of making your charge. So not only are they fast moving, they can typically run a higher average and charge a higher average for how far they can go. Cavalry models, such as these Thunder Wolf cavalry from the Space Wolf Codex, are very similar to beasts in that they get to move 12 inches, and they have the Fleet special rule, and they fall back 3d6 inches. Where they differ is that if they pass through difficult terrain, they have to take a dangerous terrain check. And on top of that, they have the Hammer of Wrath special rule. So once again, represents them colliding with the enemy as they charge and doing extra damage for free. Now let's look at the mighty monstrous creatures such as this Tyranid Haruspex or this Tau Riptide. Monstrous creatures move just like infantry. They only move 6 inches, except they have the Move Through Cover special rule. Move Through Cover allows them to roll 3 dice instead of 2 when going through difficult terrain and taking the best one. So they're a little faster when going through terrain to represent them just smashing their way through. On top of that, in the shooting phase, a monstrous creature is allowed to fire up to 2 of their weapons. And most people play this, that counts for things out of shooting phases, such as Overwatch, that you can still fire 2 of the weapons. They, however, can never go to ground because they're just too big to gain any advantage for actually going to ground. And that includes being pinned. On top of that, they have the Fear special rule, which could reduce your enemy's effectiveness in close combat against them. They have Hammer of Wrath when they smash into the enemy. And they have Relentless, which allows them to fire their weapons as if they're stationary. But most importantly, I think, is they have the Smash special rule. This makes all of their close combat attacks AP2, so they ignore any armor that they're fighting in close combat. And on top of that, they can choose to sacrifice all of their close combat attacks to make a single close combat attack at double their strength, to a maximum of 10. If they use this against vehicles, it actually allows them to re-roll their armor penetration roll, which we haven't talked about yet, so don't worry about that too much. There are even special monstrous creatures like this Riptide that have multiple unit types. This is a jetpack monstrous creature, or a jet monstrous creature. In this case, he follows all the rules for monstrous creatures, and he also follows all the rules for jetpack units. And when you combine them, you get some advantages, such as the fact that he has move through cover, which not only allows him to go through difficult terrain easier, but allows him to automatically pass dangerous terrain tests. When he's using his jetpack, going into and out of difficult terrain, he doesn't have to worry about rolling for dangerous terrain because he automatically passes it. There are other unit types that we're not going to cover in this video because they get a little more complicated, such as flying monstrous creatures, vehicles, or even gargantuan creatures. And there's also flying gargantuan creatures and super heavy vehicles. We're going to save those for our future videos because they do cover a lot of different special rules. I hope that you're able to learn a lot from this tutorial on all the different unit types. Of course, we're going to have another battle report and a link in the video description below for our Vault members, which will incorporate more of these unit types so you can see how they interact with each other. If you're not yet a Vault member, I think you know the drill by now. You can go ahead and click the link, get a free 7-day trial, get instant access to the battle report below, as well as all the battle reports for the previous tutorials and all the thousands of other battle reports, painting tutorials, behind the scenes, all the special stuff that we do for our Vault members. And you can help us to keep the lights on and keep making these videos. Because remember, it's our Vault members that help us to stay in business, not advertising. Advertising doesn't even cover the cost of the lease of the building that we are in. So we are dependent on our Vault members to help us to be able to continue making videos such as this one. If you're already a Vault member, signed up throughout the series or before, thank you so much for your patronage and thank you for supporting us. Stay tuned for more how to play Warhammer 40k 7th edition tutorials, and happy wargaming.